Every night she cleaned a children's hospital. Then she slept in her van. 9 nights now. 2 kids in the back seat, a wind chill of 8 below, and a heater that died on a Tuesday and never came back. She wasn't an addict. She wasn't running from anybody. She had a job, a name tag, a ring of keys that opened every supply closet on the 3rd floor. She did everything they tell you to do. Every single thing. And she still ended up in a parking garage scraping frost off the inside of her own windshield at 4 in the morning. 400 miles away, a woman worth almost $4 billion was boarding a private jet to fly into that same city to cut a ribbon on a hospital wing she'd named after a janitor who'd been dead 4 years. She had no idea that the woman who was about to change her life was, at that exact moment, mopping a hallway 1 floor below the wing that carried her own mother's name. Picture it. The woman who scrubs the floors of a children's hospital, kneeling on frozen asphalt in a dark parking structure, holding a 5-year-old who can't catch her breath, wrapped in the only coat her mother owns. That's where the story is going. That's the night everything cracked open. And a small wooden sparrow, carved by a grandmother who rode a Greyhound bus out of Alabama with nothing in her pockets but a pocket knife and a block of cedar, would decide what happened next. But not the way you'd think. Her name was Keisha Lawson, and she had a sentence she said to her children every single night. A sentence that had been handed down through 3 generations and 700 miles. A sentence that started in a cotton field and ended up in a parking garage. We'll come back to that sentence. Hold on to it. For now, just know she was about to run out of nights. Keisha was 36 years old, and she had the hands of a woman 15 years older. Knuckles split from bleach, a permanent crack along the side of her right thumb that never fully healed because it never got the chance to. She worked the night custodial shift at St. Bridget Children's Hospital on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, sometimes 6 when somebody called off, $13.85 an hour. No overtime her supervisor would approve. No paid sick days she could actually use because a missed shift was a missed shift, and a missed shift was a missed shift was milk that didn't get bought. She knew that hospital better than the doctors did. She knew which floor tiles were loose outside radiology, which vending machine on 2 8-quarters, which family in the oncology wing had been there so long the night nurses had quietly stopped charging them for coffee. She emptied the bins in rooms where children were dying and rooms where children were getting better, and she treated both the same, slow and careful, the way you move around something sacred. She wiped down the handrails twice, even when nobody was checking. She left the little cartoon stickers on the supply carts facing out, so a kid waking up scared at 3 in the morning would see a smiling dinosaur instead of a blank wall. Nobody paid her to think about the stickers. She thought about them anyway. Her grandmother used to say, that's the whole test of a person, what they polish when nobody's grading the shine. We need to talk about that grandmother, because none of this story makes sense without her. Odessa Lawson came north out of Lowndes County, Alabama, in March of 1962. She was 19 years old. She had a pasteboard suitcase with a belt cinched around it because the latch was broken, a Bible with her mother's maiden name written inside the cover, her daddy's bone-handled pocket knife, and 1 block of sweet cedar she'd cut herself because her hands had never once in her life known how to be still. She rode a Greyhound for 22 hours with that suitcase on her lap. Somewhere outside Cincinnati, a man's footlocker came off the overhead rack and caught the suitcase corner, and inside it, a little carved sparrow she'd whittled for the journey chipped clean at the wingtip. Odessa never sanded that chip smooth. Not in 60 years. When Keisha was small and SY, her grandmother turned the bird over in her brown hands and said, "Things that make it through carry a mark, baby." That's how you know they made it through. She was part of the Great Migration, though she never once called it that. 6 million Black Americans leaving the South over 2 generations, leaving the fields and the fear, riding trains and buses north toward Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago, with everything they owned tied with string, betting the whole of their one life on the idea that somewhere there was a city where their children could be more than what somebody else had decided. Odessa called it what her own mother called it. going up home. In Cleveland, she cleaned houses in Shaker Heights, then spent 26 years at a pressing shop on Cedar Avenue, steam and starch, 10 hours a day. She joined Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church her second Sunday in the city and never left it. She raised her daughter there and her granddaughter after that, in the third pew from the back, left side, under a window the color of grape juice and honey. In the evenings, she sat on the back steps of a rented double on East 89th Street, with the pocket knife and a block of cedar, and she whittled sparrows, dozens over the years. She gave them away to sick neighbors and new widows and any child who sat still long enough. And, while she carved, she hummed the same hymn, the one the whole church knew by heart, the old one about the sparrow, about how a thing that small is still watched over, still counted, still known by name. And there was a verse in her Bible she kept underlined in pencil so faint you had to tilt the page. The one from Psalm 84. Even the sparrow has found a home. That was the sentence. That's the one I told you to hold on to. Even the sparrow finds a home, Odessa would say, pressing a finished bird into somebody's palm. Not gets given one, baby. Finds one. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. The year she died, she put the first sparrow, the old one, the one with the chipped wing from the bus ride north, into Keisha's hand and closed her fingers over it. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. By then, the sentence wasn't words anymore. It was load-bearing. It was the beam the whole family was built on. Keisha grew up, married a man who sang off-key in the car like he was getting paid for it, and had 2 children she would have walked into traffic for without breaking stride. Her husband Terrence had been gone 22 months. He didn't leave. He died. And the way he died is the kind of thing that should make a person furious, except Keisha didn't have the energy for fury anymore. He worked construction, non-union, no benefits, the kind of crew where you get paid for the hours your boots are on the site and not 1 minute more. A nail went through his work boot on a Thursday. The cut went bad. The infection climbed his leg over 4 days, while he kept going to work, kept icing it at night, kept saying he was fine, because urgent care was $150 they didn't have. And he'd ride it out. He'd ridden out worse. By the time Keisha got him to the emergency room, the infection was in his blood. Sepsis. He was 39 years old. He died on a gurney in a hallway, waiting for a bed that opened up 40 minutes too late. And the last thing he said to his wife was that he was sorry about the money. That was the part she couldn't forgive. Not that he died, that he apologized for it. The funeral was at Mount Calvary. The choir sang the Sparrow hymn because everybody knew it was the family's, and the repast was in the basement, and Sister May Hutchins ran the kitchen like a field general and sent Keisha home with enough foil pans to last 2 weeks. The church showed up the way the church always shows up, hard and warm and all at once. And then the way it goes, the casseroles stopped and life moved on for everyone. It could still move for, and Keisha started working nights, and nights eat your Sundays alive. She stopped coming. Pastor Lucius Green left her 3 voicemails over the next year. Kind ones, no pressure in them. She saved them all. She answered none of them. When people from the church caught her at the grocery store and asked how she was holding up, she smiled the smile and said the word. Fine. We're fine. You should know that word is going to come back around in this story. Words like that always do. After Terrence, it was her and the kids. Jalen was 9. He was the kind of boy who watched a room before he entered it. He noticed when his mother put back the cheese at the checkout. He noticed when she said she wasn't hungry, which was a lie he'd stopped questioning out loud around the time his father died. He'd taken to fixing his own sneakers with packing tape winding it careful and flat around the toe where the sole had peeled away, because asking for new ones meant watching his mother's face do a thing he didn't like watching it do. When she found the tape, he just shrugged. They're fine, Ma. I like them like this. There it is again. That word. A 9-year-old had already learned the family dialect. Zora was 5. She had asthma, the real kind, the kind that turns cold air into a fist around a small chest, and a laugh that came out of nowhere like a sprinkler kicking on, and a habit of narrating her drawings while she made them. This is the house. This is the sun. The sun is wearing shoes because it's cold out. She did not understand any of what was happening to her family. Keisha worked very hard every single day to keep it that way. The eviction came in October. The building on Huff Avenue, the one Keisha had lived in for 6 years, the one where Miss Carleen across the hall kept a key to her apartment and a peppermint for each of her kids, got bought by an investment group out of Phoenix that nobody ever saw in person. Every tenant got the same letter on the same Friday. 30 days. Renovations. Units converting to short-term rentals. No exceptions. Miss Carline, who was 78 and had lived there 19 years, moved to her son's place in Akron and cried at the curb while they loaded the truck. The whole block was going that way. House by house, letter by letter, sold and flipped and priced for people who hadn't arrived yet, out from under the people who'd held the neighborhood together with casseroles and choir robes for 60 years. Keisha called everywhere. First month, last month, security deposit, $27.75 just to walk into anything with 2 bedrooms and working heat. She had $291 in her checking account and a credit card that had stopped saying yes back in August. Here's the thing most people don't know, and it's worth knowing. There is no county in this country, not one, where a full-time job at the federal minimum wage covers a 2-bedroom apartment at average rent. Keisha earned nearly double the minimum, broke her body doing it, and still couldn't clear the gap. The math wasn't a personal failure. The math was the whole design. She did not tell the church, sit with that a second, because it matters. Mount Calvary would have emptied its benevolence fund for Terrence Lawson's widow, and Keisha knew it, and that is exactly why she couldn't ask. Some of it was grief. Some of it was nights, which had taken her Sundays. But most of it was the oldest thing there is, the thing that runs deeper than reason, and people who have been strong for everybody their whole lives. She could not stand in front of the people who watched her grow up and say the sentence out loud. My kids and I have nowhere to go. Her grandmother had crossed 700 miles with a broken suitcase and never asked anybody for a thing. Keisha would find it. Even the sparrow finds a home. Finds it. So on the last night of November, she folded down the back seats of a 2004 Pontiac Montana with 224,000 miles on it, laid out a sleeping bag and 2 thrift store blankets, and told her children they were going on an adventure. Jalen looked at her for a long, level moment. 9 years old, going on 45. Okay, Ma, he said. An adventure. He knew. The way kids like Jalen always know. And he reached into the front seat, took the little wooden sparrow off the dashboard, and put it in his sister's hands, like a man handing off a lantern. The van became the apartment, and Keisha ran it like a shift. The kids slept first. She slept last, after she'd checked the locks, checked the mirrors, checked that both of them were breathing slow and even under the blankets. She kept a $10 membership at a Planet Fitness on Brook Park Road, not to work out, for the showers, so her children would walk into school smelling like soap and not like a car. She washed her work scrubs in the sink there and dried them under the hand dryer, feeding the button with her elbow, 20 seconds at a time. She bought herself a coat for $4 at the Goodwill on Lorraine, a thin gray thing with a broken zipper. She safety pinned shut because Jalen's coat and Zora's coat had eaten the coat budget, and that was correct, and she'd do it again. She kept the kids at the same school. That was non-negotiable. Whatever else was coming apart, McKinley Elementary at 8:15 every morning would not. She parked the van 3 blocks away and walked them the rest, so the other mothers at the door wouldn't see. And she stood there waving like everything was ordinary. And then she walked back to a cold van and did the day's arithmetic. Gas, food, the storage unit with the furniture, the phone that had to stay on because a job application with no callback number is a paper airplane. She kept a list of family shelters in her phone and called down it on her unpaid lunches. Full. Full. Wait list. Full. On the 7th night, After both kids were finally down, Keisha shifted Jalen's backpack off the wheel well to make room for her feet, and a spiral notebook slid out of it, the 60-cent kind from the back-to-school bin. She wasn't snooping. She told herself twice that she wasn't snooping. It fell open on its own, the way notebooks fall open to the page that gets used most, and there at the top, in his careful block print, was a heading. Stuff for when we get the place. Shower curtain. $3 at Family Dollar. He'd written. Nightlight for Z so she won't be scared. $2. A plant for the window because Ma likes them. New tape. He had crossed out new tape and written after it. Or maybe shoes. On the next page, there was a different kind of list, and this one was worse. Gas stations, ranked in a 9-year-old's handwriting. By which ones let you use the bathroom without buying anything, and which cashiers didn't watch you the whole time. The McDonald's on West 25th had a star next to it, because the vestibule was warm and nobody rushed you. He had been mapping it. The whole time she thought she was carrying this alone, her son had been quietly running logistics from the back seat, building a survival manual in pencil, and saving toward the future besides, because at the bottom of the bag, knotted inside one of his socks, was $4.61 in change. Keisha put it all back exactly the way she found it, to the angle, to the page. Then she got out of the van into the freezing dark, walked to the far pillar of the parking structure where no sound could travel back, pressed both hands flat against the cold concrete, and let the thing move through her that needed to move through her, where it would have no witness. Hold on to that notebook. It comes back. And on the dashboard, where another driver might keep a phone mount or a parking pass, Keisha kept the Sparrow. Chipped wing and all. 60-some years old. Worn smooth and dark along the back from 4 generations of thumbs, the family had taken to passing it hand to hand at night like a coal they were keeping alive. Zora slept with it some nights. Jalen held it on the nights his mother worked, sitting up front in the dark, watching the door of the parking structure where she'd walk in at 11. Every night before she clipped on her name tag, Keisha leaned into the back seat, kissed both children, and said the sentence into the dark, the one that had ridden a Greyhound out of Alabama, the one underlined in pencil in a Bible, now wrapped in a towel in a storage unit on West 25th. Even the sparrow finds a home. She said it like a prayer she wasn't sure was being heard anymore. She said it on the 8th night with her jaw locked tight so her voice wouldn't shake, and when Zora was finally asleep and Jalen had finally stopped pretending to be, Keisha Lawson turned her face to the window and cried the way she'd taught herself to cry. Without a sound. Just breath, long and slow and controlled, so the children sleeping 4 feet away would never have to know. What she didn't know was that in 2 more nights, a stranger would find them, and the stranger had once been a little girl in a car exactly like this one. 400 miles of frozen highway away, and closing, Vivian Castellano was looking out the window of a Gulf Stream at a city she'd spent 30 years refusing to land in. She was 56. She had built Castellano Care Group from a single medical staffing agency into a network of urgent care clinics and home health services valued at $3.8 billion. And she had done it with the particular cold efficiency of a person who decided early that softness was a luxury for people who'd never been hungry. She wore a charcoal coat from Loro Piana that cost more than Keisha's van. On her wrist was an A. Lang & Son. The kind of watch you don't buy to tell time. You buy it to tell yourself you made it out. She had an MBA from Wharton framed in an office she rarely sat in. Her name was on buildings. None of it had felt like anything in 4 years. Vivian grew up on the east side of Cleveland in Collinwood, in a 3rd-floor walk-up that smelled like other people's cooking and her mother's exhaustion. Her mother, Dolores Castellano, worked the night custodial shift at a downtown hospital. 11 to 7, the same hours, the same bleach, the same split knuckles, and cleaned office buildings on the weekends besides. There was a winter, when Vivian was 12, that they got put out of the walk-up and spent 6 weeks in a cousin's unheated basement, and when the cousin's patience ran out, 3 nights in a borrowed Buick in a church lot off Kinsman. Dolores told her it was an adventure. Vivian had known better even then. She'd lean in the back of that car listening to her mother pretend to sleep. And she'd made herself a promise made of iron. Never again. Never cold. Never small. Never invisible. She kept it. She clawed her way out, and she pulled her mother out with her, and she put Dolores in a warm house with a view of the lake and a thermostat she was under strict orders to abuse. Then, 4 years ago, Dolores died in that warm house, in her sleep, at peace, and somehow that was worse, because Vivian had spent her whole life fighting a cold she could no longer protect her mother from. And the war just ended, with no enemy left to beat and no one left to hand the victory to. So she gave money. She gave a great deal of it from a great distance through foundations, through program officers, through wire transfers and quarterly reports she skimmed on planes. She funded a pediatric pulmonary wing at St. Lean, Brigid Children's Hospital in Cleveland, and named it the Dolores Castellano Wing, and she approved the marble and the lettering and the donor plaque from photographs, without once setting foot inside, because every hallway in that city smelled like her mother, and she could not breathe in it. There was one thing about Vivian that her board found maddening and her facility managers found terrifying. She refused to be shown the polished version of anything. She'd walk into one of her own clinics unannounced at 2 in the morning, alone, no entourage, and stand in a corner and watch how the night shift actually ran. Daylight is a performance, she told her chief of staff once. The night shift never lies. You want to know what a place really is? Go when nobody's expecting you. It was the one thing she'd kept of her mother that wasn't grief. Dolores used to say it plain, scrubbing a floor at 3 in the morning with nobody watching. The ones nobody thinks are holding the whole building up. The dedication of the wing was scheduled for Thursday. The ribbon, the cameras, the speech, 1,200 words a communications team had written for her about legacy and vision, and every time she read it, her mother's actual voice cut through it like a wire. Dolores hadn't had a legacy. Dolores had had a mop, a bad hip, a coat she wore for 19 winters, and a sentence of her own. Vivian planned to fly on Wednesday, do the event Thursday, and be wheels up by Thursday night, in and out. Hold your breath and you can get through anything, even your hometown. But Vivian Castellano did not sleep well in hotels, and the hospital was open all night. If you've ever done everything right and still ended up with nothing. If you've ever been the person nobody thought to thank, stay with me. Because this one is for you. 400 miles of winter highway were closing between a woman who cleaned hospitals and a woman who owned them. They were going to meet on the worst night of the year. And neither of them knew it yet. The cold came down out of Canada on the 9th day like it had a grudge. By 6 in the evening, the radio was saying wind chill of 8 below by 2 in the morning, a hard freeze warning. A plea from the city to check on the elderly and bring in the pets. Nobody on the radio said anything about the people sleeping in cars, but then nobody ever does. They are the city's quietest residents. They fog up their windows in plain sight in every parking lot in America, and the whole world has agreed not to see them. Keisha sat in the Pontiac in the staff structure behind St. Non. Brigid, engine off, $11 in her wallet, and a quarter tank of gas, doing the arithmetic she did every night. Run the engine for heat, and she burned the gas she needed to get to her next shift and back. Don't run it. And her children slept in a metal box at 8 below. There was no third option. That's the thing about that kind of poverty that people who've never lived it can't quite believe. It is not a lack of effort. It is a locked room where every door opens into another locked room. Zora had been coughing since Sunday. Not the loose, rattling cough of a cold, the tight, whistling pull that Keisha had learned to fear, the sound of small airways closing like a fist. The rescue inhaler had been empty for 9 days. A refill was $48 at the pharmacy on Pearl Road. Keisha had stood at that counter on the 1st of the month, watched the number come up on the little screen, and chosen, instead, to put gas in the van so she could keep the job, so she could one day afford the inhaler. That was the trap. Every choice fed the thing that made the next choice impossible. She wrapped Zora in her own coat, the gray $4 one with the pinned zipper, and pulled her own knit hat down over the girl's ears and sat there in her scrub top with her arms locked around herself and her jaw set so it wouldn't chatter and wake the kids. She did not complain. She did not pray for someone to come. She did not let herself imagine being warm. She'd learned by the third night that imagining warmth only makes the cold louder. Jalen wasn't asleep. He never really was on the nights she worked. He sat up front with the sparrow in his fist, and he watched the door, and at 10:30, he said the thing he'd clearly been rehearsing. "Ma, I'll listen to her breathing. If it gets bad, I'll come get you. I know where the loading dock door is. Miss Frankie showed me." Frankie Doyle was the night security guard, 63 years old, built like a fire plug, a Brown's lanyard, a thermos that never seemed to empty, and a laugh you could hear 2 floors away when she chose to spend it. She'd buried a husband and raised 2 boys on a guard's wages, and she had clocked the van on the second night and said nothing. The third night, she'd left 2 cups of cocoa on the hood and walked away. Fast, so Keisha couldn't refuse them. She wasn't supposed to let anyone sleep in the structure. She did it anyway, quietly, the way some people break exactly the right rules, and she taught a 9-year-old which door to bang on if his sister couldn't breathe. Keisha had spent her unpaid lunch that afternoon on the phone. The family shelter on Lorraine. Full waitlist into spring. The cold weather warming center downtown. The woman there was kind, and the kindness made it worse. "We can take the children for the overnight," she said, "but the family beds are spoken for, and an unaccompanied placement might mean a call to county services, just to document the situation." Keisha thanked her, hung up, and sat very still for a long time. Because a call to county services was the one road she would not walk down. Not ever. She knew the statistics nobody prints on the flyers, knew them in her bones the way black mothers in this country know them, knew how fast documenting the situation becomes the situation. They could take the coal, they could take the hunger. They could not take her kids. That line did not move. That line was made of the same iron her grandmother's promise was made of. So she kissed both children. She said the sentence into the dark. "Even the sparrow finds a home," and Zora mumbled it back, half asleep the way she always did. "Sparrow finds a home, Mama." And at 11 o'clock, Keisha clipped on her name tag and went inside to clean a hospital full of other people's sick children. She had no idea that 40 feet above her, on the freshly tiled 4th floor, there was a wing with her family's whole story written on a donor plaque she'd buffed to a shine 3 nights ago without ever reading the name. And she had no idea that the woman that name belonged to was, at that exact moment, lying awake in a hotel suite a mile away, about to give up on sleep. The Ritz-Carlton put Vivian Castellano in a suite overlooking the river, and she lay awake in it the way she always did the night before she had to say her mother's name out loud in public. The Bentley was downstairs with a driver who'd been told midnight, then 1, then nothing at all. The speech sat on the desk, 1,200 words about legacy and vision, and every time she picked it up, she could hear Dolores laughing at it from somewhere. That short, dry laugh she saved for foolishness. Legacy. Dolores Castellano had had a mop and a bad hip, and 19 winters in one coat. What she'd had instead of a legacy was a rule. At 20 minutes to 2 in the morning, Vivian got dressed. She didn't call the driver. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, because the whole point was that nobody would know. She rode over to St. Bridget in the dark and walked in through the emergency entrance like anyone would, in her unremarkable charcoal coat, hair down, no jewelry but the watch, and the watch turned inward. You go when nobody's expecting you. Daylight is a performance. The night shift never lies. Nobody recognized her. She liked it that way. She found a plastic chair in the corner of the ER waiting. Aria. And she sat, and she watched. And what she watched was this. A custodian, a small black woman in scrubs, name tag turned backward, pushing a cart, stopped at a row of plastic chairs where a boy of maybe 4 sat shaking, alone, while his mother fought with paperwork at the desk. The boy was crying the silent, exhausted way kids cry when they've been crying too long to make noise. The custodian parked her cart. She didn't touch him. She just got small, got down on his level, knees on the hard floor. The way you approach something fragile and wild. She pulled off her own gloves, thin knit ones, worn through at one fingertip, and tucked them onto his shaking hands, 2 sizes too big, so his fingers disappeared entirely, and she said something Vivian couldn't hear that made the boy stop crying and start, very slightly, to smile. Then she stood up, took her cart, and went back to work, and she never once looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Nobody was supposed to notice. That was the whole point of it. Vivian noticed. She felt something move behind the wall she'd spent 4 years building. The particular wall that held back everyone who reminded her of her mother. A woman cleaning a hospital at 2 in the morning, giving away her own gloves in winter, checking on nobody's opinion before or after. Vivian didn't have a name for the woman with the cart. She only knew, with the strange certainty that sometimes arrives at 2 in the morning, that she would watch her for the rest of the night. She didn't get the chance, because at that exact moment, 2 floors down, a loading dock door banged open, and a 9-year-old boy in taped sneakers ran into the corridor screaming for his mother. After that, everything went fast. Jalen found her by the 3rd-floor supply closet. He couldn't get the words out in order. Zora. Can't. She's making the sound, Ma. She's making the sound, and it won't stop, and her lips look wrong. Keisha didn't ask a single question. The mop hit the floor. She ran. Down the back stairs, through the dock door, into the structure, and the cold hit like a slap. And there was the van, and there was her daughter. Zora was half out of the car seat. Her chest was pulling in hard under her ribs with every breath, the skin sucking in around her collarbones, the small body using every muscle it had just to move air. Her lips were going the color of a bruise. The wheeze was high and thin and getting thinner, and thinner is the wrong direction. Thinner means the airway is losing. 8 below. Inhaler, empty 9 days. Keisha had spent 13 years paying attention in a building full of medicine, and she knew exactly what she was looking at and exactly how little time it left her. She didn't think. She scooped Zora up, blanket and all, and the sparrow came too, locked in the girl's fist. She ran. Jalen ran beside her, matching her stride for stride in his taped shoes. Frankie came off her stool at the dock, took one look at the child's color, and grabbed her radio, already calling ahead before Keisha hit the doors. Through the corridor Keisha mopped every night, past her own abandoned cart, into the bright white roar of the emergency department where, 11 minutes earlier, she'd been wiping down chairs. My daughter can't breathe. Her voice came out flat and clear, the voice of a nurse calling a code, because panic was a luxury and Zora could not afford it. Severe asthma. No rescue meds. She's cyanotic. I need an ebb now. A triage nurse was already moving, and then a woman at the registration desk, tired, overworked, doing exactly what the screen in front of her required, held up one hand. Ma'am, I just need to register her first. Insurance card, photo ID, and a current address. Keisha's whole body went cold in a way the park instructor hadn't managed. If you've ever been made to fill out a form while someone you love stopped breathing, you already know what's coming. If you haven't, stay with me, because this is the moment the whole night turned. I don't. Keisha started. Her eyes were on her daughter's chest, and the blue creeping up from her lips. Treat her first. Please, I'll do every form you have after. I work here. I'm staff, 3rd floor. Please, I understand, but I can't pull up a chart without an address. It's the system. Where do you currently reside? And Keisha Lawson, 36 years old, granddaughter of Odessa Lawson, who rode out of Alabama with a broken suitcase and never asked anybody for anything, stood in the emergency room she cleaned for $13.85 an hour, holding her suffocating daughter, and could not answer the question. Because the true answer was a 2004 Pontiac with a dead heater 40 feet away. And saying that out loud, on the record, into a screen, might cost her the only two people she had left on this earth. She lives upstairs from where you're standing. It was Frankie, breathless, planting herself at the desk like a fire plug takes root. Pull the chart under my badge if you have to. This kid is turning blue, Diane. The clerk's face flickered. And let's be fair to Diane, because this story is not about her. And she was not cruel. She was a person doing her job inside a machine that had been built, screen by screen and rule by rule, to ask a homeless mother for an address while her child suffocated. The machine wasn't malfunctioning. The machine was working exactly as designed. That was the worst part. That has always been the worst part. I'm not authorized to treat the child. Now. The voice came from behind Keisha. It wasn't loud. It was the other thing. The thing better than loud. The kind of quiet that a whole room obeys before it understands why. The charge nurse looked up over Keisha's shoulder and went absolutely still. Ms. Castellano. Vivian Castellano stepped past Keisha to the desk, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. Whatever your system requires, I will personally guarantee it inside the next 60 seconds. Right now, there's a child in respiratory distress in your lobby. Take her back. I'll stand at this desk and fill in every field on that screen myself if that's what it wants. They took Zora back. The next 4 minutes were nebulizer mist and a small chest slowly remembering how to rise and fall. The albuterol did what $48 would have done 9 days ago. Zora's lips came back from blue toward pink. The wheeze loosened its grip. Her eyes, huge and frightened over the little mask, found her mother's face and locked on and stayed. And here is something true. The kind of true this whole story is built on top of. Asthma is the most common chronic disease of childhood in America, and one of the leading reasons a child ever sees the inside of an emergency room. It does not fall evenly. Black children are nearly twice as likely to have it, and several times more likely to end up in an emergency room fighting for air because of it. And the medicine that ends most attacks in minutes is not rare, and it is not complicated. For too many families, the only thing standing between a child and her next breath is a number on a pharmacy screen her mother cannot reach. Keisha stood at the bedside with her hand over Zora's hand over the little wooden sparrow, and she put her mouth close to her daughter's ear, and she breathed the sentence into her, slow, again and again, like she was pushing the words into the girl's lungs alongside the medicine. Even the sparrow finds a home, baby. Even the sparrow. We're okay. Grandma Odessa's sparrow. Even the sparrow finds a home. Vivian Castellano heard it. She was standing just past the curtain, where she'd parked herself to make good on the forms, and she heard a custodian, the same custodian, she realized. The gloves, the cart, the woman who got down on her knees for a stranger's child an hour ago, whispering an old Bible verse over a sick little girl wrapped in a $4 coat, with a chipped wooden bird in her fist. It was the exact tableau of her own childhood, redrawn in different ink. A working mother. A frightened child in a cold place. A small, ordinary, sacred object held like it was the only thing keeping the floor from giving way. Vivian had spent 4 years and a great deal of money making sure she never had to stand this close to it again. And now, she was 8 feet away, and the wall she'd built behind her mother's name came down all at once, soundlessly. The way a dam doesn't really crack. It just, at some point, stops being a dam. Frankie appeared at her shoulder, voice low, with the blunt courtesy of a woman who has already lost everything once and learned the world doesn't end. They've been living in the structure. Her and the 2 kids. 9 nights. She is the best worker in this building. And she's been sleeping in a minivan, Miss Castellano. I've been letting her, against the rules, every night, on my watch. You want to write me up? Here's my badge number. Vivian did not write her up. She looked through the gap in the curtain at Keisha Lawson, who did not yet know who Vivian was, who only knew that her daughter was breathing again. And for the first time in 4 years, she heard her mother's voice come through clean, without one drop of grief. attached to it. The ones nobody thanks are holding the whole building up. There she is, Ma. Vivian thought. There's the one. If you've ever been offered help and felt your spine go stiff with the shame of needing it, you already know what Keisha did next. Stay with me. Because this is the part most people get wrong. They moved Zora up to a room on the 4th floor for observation. The new floor. The one with the fresh tile and the donor plaque by the elevators that Keisha had buffed to a shine 3 nights ago without ever reading the name on it. Jalen curled up in the chair beside his sister's bed with the sparrow in his fist and was asleep in 4 minutes. The deep, sudden sleep of a boy who had been on duty for 9 straight nights and had finally been relieved. Around 4 in the morning, with both children breathing easy, Keisha stepped into the hallway to find the vending machine and found instead the woman in the charcoal coat waiting. They told me your name, Keisha said. At the desk, Castellano. She looked down the hall at the plaque by the elevators, the brushed steel letters she'd polished without reading, and the arithmetic landed slow and then all at once. It's your name on the wall. It's my mother's name on the wall, Vivian said. Dolores. She cleaned the hospital 2 miles from here for 31 years. Night shift, 11 to 7. She paused. She raised me alone, and there was a winter, when I was 12, when we got put out of our apartment, and we slept 3 nights in a borrowed Buick in a church lot off Kinsman. She told me it was an adventure. The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped, slow and content. I knew it wasn't, Vivian said. The way your son knows. Keisha didn't say anything. There was nothing to say to that. It was the first time in 9 nights in 22 months, maybe in her whole adult life, that another person had looked straight at her and not needed one single thing explained. Then Vivian reached into her coat and Keisha's whole body tightened. Because she knew this part. She had lived this part. She had lived this part. The wallet. The checkbook. The clean transaction that lets somebody walk away feeling good. Whatever it takes to fix this, Vivian started. An apartment. First, last, deposit. A year of it, 2 years. I can have it arranged by noon. No. It came out flat and certain. Keisha surprised herself with how certain. Miss Castellano, I clean your hospital. I am not a tax write-off. She wasn't angry. She was something steadier than angry. Something with a foundation under it. You know what my grandmother carried out of Lons County, Alabama in 1962? A broken suitcase, her daddy's pocket knife, and a block of cedar. She rode a Greyhound 22 hours to a city she'd never seen, and she cleaned other people's houses, and she pressed other people's shirts, and she never once in 60 years asked anybody for a thing she hadn't earned. She carved that bird my daughter's holding right now, and she had a verse she kept underlined in her Bible, and she said it to me my whole life, and I say it to my babies every night. Even the sparrow finds a home. Finds it. Not gets handed one. She didn't carve that bird so somebody could write her grandbaby a check. She carved it so I'd remember. I come from the kind of people who can build a nest out of nothing, in the cold, in a strange land, and make it hold. Keisha lifted her chin. I don't need you to save me. I'm not drowning. I'm cold and I'm out of road. And those are different things. Something crossed Vivian Castellano's face that her board of directors had never once seen there. She put the wallet away, slowly, like it embarrassed her. You're right, she said. I'm doing it again. I've spent 4 years writing checks from altitude, so I'd never have to stand this close to anyone. She was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed registers, from donor to daughter. So let me say it differently. I'm not offering you a home. I'm offering you the time it takes to find your own. 90 days. A subsidized unit that you pay into every month, your name on the lease, not mine. Childcare during your shifts so your son can go back to being 9 years old. And a seat in the patient care technician program at Tri-C, 12 weeks, Because Frankie tells me you already do half a nurse's job on a janitor's pay. And I believe her, because I watched you work tonight before I ever knew your name. She held Keisha's eyes. Not a check to cash, a floor to stand on. What you build on it is yours. All of it. Keisha looked through the doorway at her daughter, breathing easy, pink, alive, and her son asleep at his post with the bird in his fist. My kids come first, she said. Before your timeline, before your program, before your gratitude, before anything. If those things ever pull against each other, my kids win, and I walk, and I don't look back. That, Vivian said, is the only answer that would have made me trust you. Keisha nodded, slow, and then she squared up and asked for the thing that was bigger than herself, because she was her grandmother's grandchild, and that family had never once gotten all the way to a door without holding it open behind them. If you really want to do something, she said, don't do it for me. There's a rule at that desk downstairs that makes a mother recite her address while her baby turns blue. The woman running that desk wasn't cruel. She was doing exactly what the screen told her to do, so fix the screen. She thought of the pharmacy on Pearl Road, the $48, the 9 days, and the inhalers. A case of rescue inhalers costs your company less than the flowers at your ribbon cutting, and one of them is the only thing that stood between my daughter and a coffin tonight. Stock them. Give them. For the next mother. Because there is always, always a next mother. Vivian Castellano stood in the hallway of a wing named for her dead mother, 4 floors above the city that raised them both, and understood, for the first time since the funeral, what the building had actually been for. She'd built it as a tombstone. Keisha had just shown her how to make it a door. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building called Watterson Court, on the west side, 15 minutes from the hospital. 2 bedrooms, laminate floors, a stove with all 4 burners working, a refrigerator that hummed its one long note, and a front door with a deadbolt that turned with a solid, final sound that Keisha stood and listened to 3 times in a row, like a song she wanted to learn by heart. It wasn't beautiful. The carpet was the cheap kind. The light over the sink buzzed, but heat came up through the vents, and the walls held still, and there was a window over the sink that faced east. And that's where Keisha set the sparrow. On the sill. In the morning light, chipped wing and all, Jalen got the small bedroom. He stood in the doorway a long time before he went in, looking at it the way you look at something you're afraid will be taken back. Then he closed the door, gently, the careful, deliberate close of a boy choosing privacy for the first time in his life. And Keisha stood in the hall with her hand pressed over her mouth and let him cry alone. In there, because a 9-year-old deserves a door, and because her son had been brave for too many seconds in a row, and some debts you pay by walking away from them. That first Saturday, Keisha drove to the Family Dollar with a spiral notebook riding shotgun, opened to a page of careful block print, and went down the list item by item. The shower curtain, $3, white with little blue fish on it. The nightlight, $2, shaped like a star, plugged in low on Zora's wall before that night's bedtime. A pothos plant for the kitchen window, marked down to $4 because 2 of its leaves were yellow, which Keisha figured just made it family. And 1 pair of new sneakers, not the crossed out maybe from the list, but the real thing, white, size 4.5, paid for in part with $4.61 in change that a boy poured out of his sock onto the counter, like a man settling an old account. Jalen wore them out of the store. The tape stayed in the backpack anyway. Just in case, he said, and nobody argued with that. She enrolled at Tri-C that same week, 3 nights of class, clinicals on Saturdays, 12 weeks. She kept the custodial shift the whole way through, every night, because the lease had her name on it, and her name was going to be the thing that paid it. She fell asleep at the kitchen table over a workbook on vital signs, more than once, and more than once woke at dawn with a blanket over her shoulders that she had not put there. Jalen. Of course it was Jalen. Some habits, it turns out, you don't break in a boy like that. You just wait for the day they stop being armor and start being character. She passed her boards in March. Patient care technician. Memorial Regional took her on days, $19.40 an hour. Full medical and dental, herself and 2 dependents. The first time she took Zora to a pediatric pulmonologist and did not have to choose between the visit and the gas to get there. She sat in the parking lot afterward and cried the good way. The loud way, the way she had never once allowed herself in the van. In month 4, she called the program office and declined the rest of the housing subsidy. Her name, her rent, her floor. Vivian didn't argue. She'd been expecting the call almost to the week. The 90 days were never about the apartment, she said on the phone. They were about you believing you deserved one. And one Sunday morning that spring, a thing happened that no program and no paycheck could have done. Keisha Lawson put her children in clothes that smelled like their own closet and drove east, and walked back through the doors of Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church for the first time in almost 2 years. She slid into the third pew from the back, left side, under the window the color of grape juice and honey, where her grandmother had sat for half a century. Nobody made a fuss, which is its own kind of grace. Sister May Hutchins squeezed her shoulder exactly once on the way past. Pastor Green caught her eye from the pulpit and gave her a nod that contained 3 unanswered voicemails and not 1 ounce of reproach, and said only, when she shook his hand at the door, "Welcome home." In the car afterwards, Zora asked why she'd been crying in there, and Keisha said, "Baby, those were the other kind. Those were the kind you get to keep." But Vivian did one thing more, and it was the thing that mattered. She went back to her company, and she gutted the rule. Across every emergency department Castellano Care Group touched, the policy flipped to 4 words: care first, paperwork after. No address required to be seen. No proof of insurance required to be treated. No exceptions. No pilot program. No committee. She put a standing supply of pediatric rescue inhalers in every one of those ERs. Free, no questions asked, stocked on the shelf the way other places stock bandages. And she started a fund. She let the night shift name it, because it was theirs. And the night shift, hearing the story the way night shifts hear everything, secondhand and immediately, named it the Sparrow Fund. Emergency housing help, childcare help, a way up and a way through. For the people who clean the hospitals and cook in the cafeterias and push the carts at 3 in the morning. The ones nobody thinks. The ones holding the whole building up. Nobody got fired. Diane at the registration desk kept her job because the rule that failed her had been failing everyone, and you do not punish a person for a machine. And when the Sparrow Fund seated its first small board, there was 1 chair on it reserved by design for somebody who actually worked nights, and the night shift voted loudly and unanimously for Frankie Doyle, who ran her first meeting with the Browns lanyard on, the thermos open, and not 1 minute wasted. Some rule breakers, it turns out, were just policy writers waiting for somebody to finally ask. And here is the cold arithmetic Vivian laid in front of her own board when they flinched at the cost. Keeping a family housed and a child's asthma-controlled costs a fraction of what the system already spends catching that same family after it falls. The repeat emergency visits. The shelter nights. The crises that only happened because the cheap fix came too late. It was cheaper to be decent. It had always been cheaper to be decent. They just hadn't been measuring the right thing. On the day they finally dedicated the wing, Vivian walked to the podium, looked at the 1,200 words her team had written about legacy and vision, and set them face down on the lectern. She talked instead about a woman named Dolores who mopped a hospital for 31 years and ate her dinner standing up at midnight because sitting down meant she might not get back up. She talked about the people on shift in that very building at that very moment, the ones who would clean up after the reception when everyone in their good coats had gone home. She did not name Keisha. She didn't have to. Keisha was in the back of the room in scrubs on her lunch break, and the 2 of them found each other's eyes across all those folding chairs for exactly 1 second, and that 1 second was the entire transaction, and it was enough. Later that month, Vivian drove out to a senior building in Slavic Village to see a woman named Earlene Pugh, 82 years old, who had pushed a cart beside Dolores Castellano for 3 decades and still kept her own floor spotless out of pure muscle memory. Miss Erlene poured weak coffee into good cups, listened to the whole story straight through without interrupting once, and then was quiet for a long time, the way old women are quiet when they are deciding how much truth you can carry. "You didn't help that girl because you're rich, baby," she finally said. "Lord knows I have met rich people who would step over their own mother to keep a shine on their shoes. You helped her because you remembered." She set her cup down. "That's the only difference there ever is, between the ones who stop and the ones who walk on by. It isn't money, it's memory. You remembered what the cold felt like, so you couldn't pretend you didn't see it." She patted Vivian's hand twice, like setting a stitch. "Your mama gave you a lot of things, baby, but that's the one that mattered." A year later, Keisha was driving home from a day shift. A real schedule now, home before the school bus, when she passed the lot near the Planet Fitness on Brook Park Road and saw a car parked in the far corner with the windows fogged from the inside. That particular fog. The kind that only forms when people have been breathing in a closed space for too long. She knew that fog. She had made that fog. She pulled over before her mind had finished the thought. A young man, 23 maybe, sat in the driver's seat with an infant asleep against his chest and the gray, careful face of someone who has run out of numbers to call. His name was Deshaun. He told her through 2 inches of cracked window that he was fine. Keisha almost smiled. There was that word again, the family dialect, the load-bearing lie, the one her husband said for 4 days. The one her son said about his taped-up shoes. The one she herself had handed out at the grocery store like a business card. "I didn't ask if you were fine," she said. "I asked how long." She brought him food that night and the next. On Sunday, she sat in the passenger seat with the baby on her shoulder and walked him through the forms she now knew by heart, pointing at the right boxes, translating the language nobody translates for you, the way nobody had done for her until it was almost too late. She made one phone call to the Sparrow Fund, and before she left, she pressed something small into his hand. A sparrow, carved from a block of cedar with a pocket knife, a little rough at the tail, the first one she had ever made herself. Because Keisha Lawson had taught herself to whittle that winter, on the back steps of Watterson Court in the evening light, the way her grandmother used to, humming the old hymn without entirely noticing she was doing it, because her hands had finally learned how to be still enough to make something instead of just holding on. "Even the sparrow finds a home," she told him. "Hold on to it. Then make one for whoever you find next." The old bird still sits on the windowsill at Watterson Court in the east light, chipped wing and all. It sits beside a rescue inhaler that is always, always full now, and a school picture of a boy in brand new sneakers, and a second-place ribbon from a kindergarten art contest for a drawing of a son wearing shoes. A new home, and the oldest thing they own, kept in the place of honor. 700 miles and 3 generations from a cotton field in Lowndes County, and the sparrow is still flying, and it has never once flown alone. Nobody knocked on Dolores Castellano's window 40 years ago. Nobody knocked on Odessa Lawson's either. So one woman spent a fortune, and another spent a Sunday afternoon, making sure somebody knocks on the next one. That's the whole machine when you strip it down to the frame. Not money, memory, moving from one cold night to the next, knocking on windows. Here's what I keep turning over, and I want you to sit with it too, honestly, before you scroll on. Keisha did everything right. She worked. She paid what she could. She raised her kids and buried her husband, and never once asked the world for a thing it didn't owe her. And she still ended up in that van. So tell me straight, when a person who does everything right still falls through the floor, whose fault is that? Hers for not finding a way faster? Or all of ours for building a floor with that big a hole in it? This one is going to divide the room. I already know it. Tell me below where you land and be honest about it. If this story moved something in you, do the small thing. Subscribe and send this to the one person who showed up for you on a night when nobody else did. They'll know exactly why you sent it. This is a work of fiction. Keisha, Vivian, Odessa, Dolores, and everyone you just met came out of my own head. But the cold is real, and the math is real, and the Greyhound buses were real. And there are people sleeping in cars in your city tonight who did everything right. I wrote this one thinking about every grandmother who came north with a suitcase and a Bible and a pair of hands that didn't know how to be still, and about everybody working a night shift. Right now, in a building that doesn't know their name. If that's you, I see you. I'll see you in the next one.